Hey, Margie here. Unfortunately, we live in a toxic world, and that has negative consequences for our bones and overall health. And for many of us, it's overwhelming, and we don't even know where to begin. But the good news is there is so much that we can do, and it's manageable. And that's what we're going to delve in today with our very special guest, Dr. Aly Cohen. And Dr. Cohen is the co author of the best selling consumer guidebook, Non Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. And Dr. Cohen is triple board certified in rheumatology, internal medicine, and integrative medicine, as well as an environmental expert, health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. She is on faculty of the Academy of Integrated Health and Medicine, where she created and manages the environmental medicine curriculum for medical colleagues. Dr. Cohen has collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, Cancer Schmancer, and other disease preventing organizations, and is co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine, which is part of the Oxford University Press Wild Integrative Medicine series. In 2015, she created the smarthuman.com to share environmental health, disease prevention, and wellness information with the public. She lectures nationally on environmental health topics for elementary schools, high schools, colleges, universities, medical schools, and physician training programs. And she's a regular expert guest for television and podcasts. She has been the recipient of countless awards, including Top Docs New Jersey in Rheumatology from 2016 to 22, in New York Magazine 2022, Philadelphia Top Docs 2022, the New Jersey Healthcare Heroes Award in Education for the Smart Human in 2015 and 2016, as well as the Burton Eichler Award for Humanitarianism. Dr. Cohen is working to educate and empower the next generation to make safer, smarter lifestyle choices through the creation of environmental health and prevention curriculum for schools nationally. So lots of great information. We really talk about tangible steps we can all take to really just live a better life for our bones, for our health, and even for future generations. So make sure to stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Cohen, to the podcast. I can't even tell you how happy I am to be here with you.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, you come with such an amazing background. I mean, the fact that you are board certified in three things, integrative medicine, rheumatology, which is just amazing, as well as internal medicine. So you really can look at this from such a wonderful perspective. And I just know you're going to add so much great information to everybody. But let's talk about the environment, because I know you wrote this amazing book, which I love, on toxins. And, a lot of people sort of dismiss the environment, or they think, oh, I have other things to deal with. Like, yeah, I know we're in a toxic environment, but that's just the way it is. But it's a lot more than that. And so why don't you start telling us about our modern day environment and, where do these toxins come from? And you as a rheumatologist, and as an internist, you you see what it does on our health. It's not something we can just sort of poo-poo and say, maybe I'll work
Right.
on it. So why don't you fill us in on
Yeah.
that?
So, I was a practicing rheumatologist for a good 15, I would say 10 to 15 years, very conventional in a very big practice, 15-minute appointments. And I just wasn't feeling it was enough. It was a lot of medicines as we were trained in medical school. And even today, it's all medicines in medical school. They do not train on nutrition more than about 8 hours in four years of medical school, which is shocking. And so I was kind of going along in that way, and then I realized that I needed to learn more, and so I went into integrative medicine and trained for 2 years with Dr. Andrew Weil and his program, which is phenomenal. And then eventually I moved into environmental health because as you can read in my book, my dog got sick,
No,
and
tell us exactly, because it's
so if they want to get
I like the backstory. Yeah, tell us.
yeah,
Yes.
it is the intro, and it's really why I do what I do. It's really my dog, my golden retriever, 4.5 years old, became very sick, and we didn't know why he got sick. We thought he was, golden. He ate something. We'll take him to the vet. It'll be all over with. And I had two young kids at the time, so I was busy. And it turned out he was jaundice. He had autoimmune hepatitis. So autoimmune liver disease, which is not only unusual in humans or even dogs, but even this specific, this breed of golden retriever. And it was such a shock to my system. And, I'm an animal lover and dog lover and cat lover and everything. And so when this happened, it was sort of an affront to me that something had made his immune system. I mean, I was an immune doctor as it was, I'm a rheumatologist. So to have this happen was so ironic. And I was treating him like an autoimmune disease patient with all of the medications. But I really wanted to know what made his immune system turn against himself, and so like all my other patients. So, it really led me to understand what air quality is all about and cosmetics and personal care products and what chemicals are in there. And are they regulated or are they just really put in there and put on the shelf? Cleaning products, industrial chemicals like stain guard and scotch guard and grease proofing chemicals and paints and solvents and everything you can think of, even down to drinking water, which we'll talk about, I hope. Um, but what happened was, I really came from a place of frustration and anxiety over this issue and really not sure if this was really true. And actually, over 7 to 8 years, I've gotten so well versed in this material. Infused myself into researchers groups that really wouldn't let most people in, but I worked my butt off to get into those groups. And so I feel like I bring now this culmination of three fields: rheumatology, integrative medicine, and environmental health, and they all interact with each other. And the reason it's so valuable now is because we're really in kind of a crisis mode. Our bodies are really not as healthy as they should be. We live in a very, um, chemical laden world. We have had over 95,000 chemicals since World War II, essentially, is the explosion added into everything we love to eat, drink, put on our skin, feminine care products, materials, plastics, cookware, all that. And we in this country have no regulatory oversight on testing of those chemicals that go into the products that are on the shelves that we end up putting on our bodies, our kids' bodies, our pets. And so when I really learned that there's no oversight, no manufacturing requirements, it's a very manufacturing, favored country in terms of the laws. We are really in a pickle where now we're finding these chemicals actually do have health consequences. They can act as low level hormones and cause disruption of the endocrine system, which is our hormone system in the body: thyroid, breast, prostate, testicles, ovaries, growth and development, bone health, which we'll get into. So there's a variety of chemicals in our body that are called hormones that get disrupted by these environmental chemicals. And the problem is we can't really put the genie back in the bottle, right? Because they're not stopping the manufacturing these chemicals. There's too many out there. And they essentially create new ones that, like BPA, they banned that in certain products like baby bottles, but they're certainly making BPS, BPSIP, and all these other regrettable, substitutions now. So my goal is always to empower the individual because I wanted to be empowered back when my dog was sick and I didn't have a guidebook. I didn't have a platform like the Smart Human, which is my social media. I didn't have a place to learn where to cut back on these exposures. And so, yeah, they lead into a lot of health conditions, immune system conditions as well. But certainly everything from bone growth and development, osteoporosis development, osteopenia. Um, so yeah, there's a very big connection. We're at the point where it's culminated in problems in a big way. And I'm helping to, I hope, reduce those exposures and reduce risk for disease.
So let's go into bone. Let's really delve into this because people want to know what are the biggest culprits and what can we do? Let's start with the biggest culprits that you see.
Okay. Well, there's the way you look at people from a holistic perspective of, the human walks into your office. And then there's also the cellular level of how people are in terms of their health or not. So you can kind of break it down. I see a lot of osteopenia, a lot of osteoporosis. Usually I see a lot of patients that really don't want to be on medications from a conventional doctor. Whether it's their primary or family medicine or endocrinologist or gynecologist. So I see a lot of patients that are looking for other alternatives. It's interesting, bone is a living tissue, as you and your audience certainly knows. We remodel our bone throughout our entire lives, which is why when you fracture as a kid, boom, next week, the bone is all better. It's like magic. And we still have that capability as we age, but it may slow down. But when you throw in other factors that could also affect that remodeling, where we repair bone that we lose naturally, That comes into play with a lot of different issues. Nutritionally, of course, whether or not we absorb the right components of that calcium, vitamin D, magnesium, vitamin K. If our gut microbiome is not up to snuff and it doesn't work well, we're not going to absorb the actual bone components that make bone matrix strong and functional and helps rebuild any loss. And so when I talk to patients who come through, first, I get an assessment. Where are you in terms of your history of fracture? Where are you in terms of your history of medication? What's your lifestyle like? Are you weight bearing? Are you walking? Are you doing exercises that are creating those forces up the femoral shaft of the legs into the hip area? Because we know that bone is a living tissue and it responds to forces. So you definitely can start working on those movements that actually shift that weight up your legs to your hips, and really, where is the location of any of your bone osteopenia or osteoporosis? Have you been on medications that may have contributed to bone loss for one reason or another, whether it's asthma medications, long-term prednisone, heparin? Did you have an eating disorder as a young person that really set your bone strength back before it even reached its peak mass? And that you can argue is a lot of young athletes, like the female athlete triad is a remarkable triad of very low weight young women generally, but can be men. But typically low weight, so that you stop menstruating. And when you stop menstruating, because you're not having that, you don't have enough fat tissue to actually get pregnant. It's really anthropologic. You also start to lose bone mass because you don't get those estrogen cycles. So there's a lot of understanding a history. Everyone is not the same. And so a lot of time in my world is spent getting a great history to understand what those choices could be without getting hurt. And I think that's something that we unfortunately don't have as a setup in our Western situation. Our Western,
I couldn't agree with you more because so often the DEXA comes back and there's a regimen. Okay, not even knowing where did you have an eating disorder and that's why you have low, that's why your bone density is low. Are you actively losing bone? Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of how critical the history is and how often there's just a standard treatment once your bone density comes back,
right,
which is
very algorithmic.
yeah.
And listen, that was set up many years ago by by Pfizer, really, who started with alendronate back in the day. And the story goes, and I believe you can look this up on NPR. There was a really good story that was, done, maybe a dozen years ago. They really were the first to put bone density machines for free in offices around the country. And they could do this. They put in family medicine and internal medicine, and they gave these free machines away because they were the ones that had the medicines that once you tapped into those numbers, negative 1.5 for osteopenia on the numbers line versus the negative 2.5 for osteoporosis, they set the rules so they could, master the game. And, it doesn't mean they were malicious. It just means that it was a really, opportune way of getting people onto medication without very, much discussion. Bone densities also have their innate issues. The machine itself is calibrated to a 30-year-old female, a Caucasian female's bones as sort of peak bone mass. So if you're Asian, if you're African American, if you're a man and you get on that machine, you have to incorporate that into the discussion for what you choose to do for therapy if there's a problem. You have to make sure you're thinking about not just the machine numbers, but who is that person getting in the machine? What is their lifestyle? What is their diet? What is their ethnicity? And thinking about some of those factors that play out into ultimately what your decisions are in terms of therapy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, let's go back because we could really talk 10 hours. We could talk, I'm so on the same wavelength. And I
Yeah,
know the people listening feel the
yeah.
same way because that's been the frustration, what else can I do? And that's what people want. And that's so great that you offer it. And, and we know it works. Just give us real briefly, you've done well with people.
Yeah, so there are not, an enormous number of options outside of medication. Remember, there's very few medications out there as well. And if you're diagnosed, say, at 50 or 60 postmenopausal osteoporosis or osteopenia, you're looking at a very small window of even medication therapies because bisphosphonates are now only for 5 years, right? They used to be forever. Then they found that there was higher risks of peripheral fractures, especially the long bones. There were some issues with, of course, the jaw and some of the bisphosphonates in terms of bone growth and dental work. So you really are it's recommended no longer than 5 years on a bisphosphonate. And then you can move on to something, say, like a Prolia, or depending if you're on Forteo, which is a bone builder. It's an anabolic type of drug, whereas, say, Prolia, which is a biologic, and bisphosphonates just sort of maintain bone. They don't build bone technically. They block the cells that break down bone, so to speak. But there's only so many choices. I mean, I don't want to keep going on the list, but there's really less than a dozen bone therapies for these conditions. So the question is, well, what else can we do? Because if you're diagnosed at 50 or 60 and you live till 90, knock wood, 100, you really have got many, many years and you don't have enough medicines to cover that if you're really treating with medicines alone. So what I often really try to do, and again, this is always a general discussion. This is not to tell anyone what to do individually who's listening to this because they could get in trouble in terms of their own personal health issues. But what I try to do is think about what can we bolster in terms of lifestyle that has been shown to be effective to build bone and can stave off the use of medications for as long as possible. Or is there a real reason to be on medicines that integrate these lifestyle changes anyway that may keep you on a lower dose of that medicine for a shorter period of time? So that's integrative approach where you do both medicines plus lifestyle. So there's never a reason just to do medicine. And there's never a reason entirely if you have certain conditions that you should just be lifestyle if it would really put you at risk. So that's something that has to be teased out for the individual.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because sometimes people will say, "Oh, they feel they have a choice. It's like medicine or not medicine." And they'll say, "Oh, I've decided to go on medication." So then in their mind, I'm done with everything else. They feel, "Okay, I'm on a new path." But it's so not
Will take
true.
work. I mean, that's the thing. What you and I both know, a lot of people know that to be healthy, it actually takes work.
Yeah.
The default is to get sick because you're inundated with junk food. You don't have to move and walk, and you don't have to, you're stressed out. You don't sleep. That's the default. That's the average American as we know it, or human as we know it worldwide. Is that to work at it means that you have to go out and walk and do the labor, get clean vegetables and fruits and get rid of pesticides. You have to do work. And that's not something that people are comfortable with or that they can afford all the time. So it is definitely an access issue, and it's definitely socioeconomic can be a big issue too as part of this.
Right. And people just and it's not really right to think, oh, it's this or that. We always like to take a quick fix, and there's just not such a thing. But for the people that do the work, oh my gosh, right? Everything improves. It's amazing
Yeah,
to
and you
me.
can get off lots of medicines, not even just for osteoporosis or osteopenia. I mean, I get patients off of high blood pressure medicines, because they're losing some weight and they lost weight because they were snoring. And believe it or not, snoring contributes to hypertension. So they got a sleep evaluation and they got a CPAP machine. And now they don't, they lost weight and they're off medicines and they have more energy. So you go upstream to what could be the underlying issue that is giving you blood pressure issues or raising your blood sugar or raising your cholesterol or making your bones thinner before your time, really. So you have to kind of go upstream. What are you putting in your body? What are you drinking on a regular basis? Is it a lot of carbonated drinks that acidify your bloodstream? We know that high protein diets, extremely high protein, not just a little protein, but a lot of protein, seltzer and a lot of carbonated beverages, which is just, CO2, is acidifying your bloodstream, your blood. So you really want to try to stay towards an alkaline side, not because you have to buy water that's alkaline water, but fruits and vegetables are alkaline. Lemon water is alkaline, believe it or not. When you drink it, it hits the stomach and you really do, it turns alkaline. So, there's lots of things that you can do that are very anthropologic. I always talk about anthropology Go back to our ancestors. We walked more, we ran more, we were physical, we weren't sitting in chairs all the time, we're driving, we bicycled, or well, maybe not bicycled, but there's been a long history of being much more physical than we are now. We had clean water, clean food, we ate whole fruits and vegetables. We bolstered our gut microbiome so that our gut, which is 24 feet of bowel, was able to absorb the food that we actually ate because it was all a system. And I think that when we start talking about that with patients, people start to say, I got it. I get it. I can do this. And that's what I've seen lots of patients getting stronger bones or at least maintaining, but certainly not falling even. Fall precautions are huge. And I'll give you this one anecdote I tell patients. People come in with their bone densities and I show them how to read them. I show them what they are looking at because I think you need to educate your patients. And I say, listen, let's just say you have two women, hypothetically, and they both have T scores that are negative 3.5. So really bad numbers technically, right? And one woman is sitting on a couch eating bonbons or not really exercising, and she's on multiple blood pressure medications that make her fall because she's been too tightly controlled. She doesn't drink a lot of water. She's dehydrated. Her knees hurt, so she may fall from an osteoarthritic knee pain one day. She's just inactive. She has no upper body strength to catch herself if she falls. Then there's the other woman who's the same exact T score, negative 3.5. But she's exercising, stretching. She's not on blood pressure medicines that bottom her out and make her fall. She's hydrated. She doesn't go out with, shoes on the icy sidewalks. Two women, the same number T score, who is going to fracture if they fall?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So the idea is that to me, a bone density is not the end of the world. It's a warning. It's a red flag to get going with other things, to start getting your body back in shape to where it should be or could be. And that's what I look at as a bone density. It is not a life sentence. It is actually the beginning of making those positive changes so that when you do fall, if you do fall, you catch yourself, your upper body strength. There's just so much more to bones and risk for fracture than just simply a bone density value.
I agree completely. And I always tell people a diagnosis of osteopenia or osteoporosis is really an
Yeah.
opportunity. It gives you something like, you know what? Let me look at my life. Let me see the areas. You're okay. Nothing has happened, but let me see the areas that maybe I'm deficient in that I can improve. So let's get back to because you are a true expert in environmental toxins and the environment. And let's get back then to people listening, because it is overwhelming when we think there's just so many toxins that people, instead of dealing with it, a lot of times people go into overwhelm and say, you know what, I'll eat well, I'll do some things, but I'm just not even going to go there. So what do you tell people? Like, where do you start when you have people, reducing their exposure? So your patients come in, is that something you deal with pretty quickly?
Yeah. Well, I feel them out and I see where they are. You always meet your patients, as you know, with clients, want to meet them where they're at because you don't want to overwhelm people and then the resistance goes up. What I like to tell patients and what I tell people on podcasts and anywhere I can go, high schools and like, is that first of all, it's a journey. Okay. There is no right or wrong, and there is no time frame that you have to get it right or you fail. Okay. I am still coloring my hair. Okay. The woman who writes textbooks and guidebooks, which by the way is a great way to kind of dive in, is just to kind of look at a guidebook like the one we wrote. But the idea is that there is no journey that is specific to one person. You have to fit this into your very fluid lifestyle. If you're going off to college and you can't bring a reverse osmosis water filter, so you do something else like a pitcher filter. Moving homes, you have financial issues right now. You may hold off on certain purchases and buy organic USDA frozen foods because they have all the nutrient value of fresh, if not more, because they're flash frozen. Whereas fresh organic foods with less pesticides travel great distances and often have less nutrient value. And so the idea is there's always a hack, even if your life is fluid and that in going through different periods of ups and downs, financial stress, all of those things. But what I try to say, first of all, is you start off with knowing that there's a problem with chemicals in a lot of our products. And what you start with is don't buy products as much as you can avoid them. We don't need a surface cleaner, a window cleaner, a door handle cleaner, a carpet cleaner, a rug. There's 1,000 products for cleaning alone that we do not need. And those chemicals will end up getting inside our bodies, believe it or not. They get into dust, they land on surfaces, we touch them, we put them in our mouths, they get in our paws of our pets and get on our children. So the cheapest way to start and the smartest way is actually don't buy stuff to begin with. If you don't have it in your home, it probably won't get into your body. Okay. So that's a really good starting place because it saves money and it makes people less stressed because now they just don't have to buy. You can use vinegar, you can use sea salt, you can use very basic things that cost nothing. We do a do it yourself list of all of these cleaning products, that people might want, but also resources to find non-toxic cleaners and that kind of thing if you're just too busy. So that's the first thing. The second thing with chemicals, think about processed foods. We all know what processed foods are, things in packages, things that have to be opened up, like cans, often, cardboard boxes, anything that you're eating that's sort of not right out of the ground, technically, in the produce section. You want to try to avoid the things that are in cans. They have high sodium, they have bisphenol A from the lining of the cans. You want to try to go with frozen foods that are organic are much cheaper. Whole foods in the fresh section. Again, USDA whenever you can, USDA organic, but you can also wash produce that's fresh or in the supermarket with 1 part white vinegar and 3 parts just warm, clean water or even baking soda. So there's a method of cleaning off pesticide residues if you can't get a hold of organics. And then the last thing I really push patients and everyone I talk to is clean water and filtering your water because your body needs water. We're made up of water. And so by getting that right, you're cleaning out your body, but you're also not introducing new chemicals into your body from these water sources that are really not that regulated.
And what are your favorite water tips on that, on the water
Yeah.
note?
I started off with, a pitcher like everyone else. And I think those are carbon blocks. Water runs quickly through them. So of course, anything that's going to run quickly is going to also filter less. But it's the best thing when you're traveling. Water bottles have them now, many of them. Also, if you live in apartments or you don't feel that you can, put a bigger system in. I have since really started to push people on reverse osmosis water systems. There's a lot of junk out there in terms of the companies that claim to take out so much, which they don't. They may, a countertop one may take out 40 chemicals, even though it's reverse osmosis, it's all dependent on the pore size of that potential material. So you do want to look for certification. You want to look for companies that really cover hundreds of chemicals, not just 40. And water is made through reverse osmosis through 3 canisters and then goes into a tank. So you're making water while you sleep, essentially, because it's taking that much time, that much surface area. And so I'm really a big fan of reverse osmosis now because they really run about 300 for a really good one. And they're usually under your sink. They don't take up much space. And so I'm really comfortable telling people, even who have, minimal income, that this is something will actually save you money because you're cleaning it at the source, which is your tap, which is well water or municipal. And once you put it in, you have a year without buying water bottles. You don't have to, you fill up in stainless steel and glass. So it turns out to be more of an upfront cost than it is, replacing drop-in filters. And it can get very expensive.
Yeah, I think we've had reverse osmosis, I think for like 34 years in this house. That was
Yeah.
one of the first things I got. Do you recommend people then just use that for the drinking water so they don't have to have it for the showers and everything
Yes.
else?
For showers, I tell people something very simple, like we talk about in the book, where you just basically can get a shower head from a big box store that are about $20. The shower heads actually have carbon blocks in them and they have replacements. So for $20, you can do that on your shower heads and then spend your money on a reverse osmosis under your kitchen sink and focus really on the drinking and the cooking. I think a $10,000 whole house filter is a waste of money because how often do you shower for that long anyway? Rarely would I ever recommend that.
Do you recommend making sure then that people aren't deficient in their minerals if they're using the osmotic filter?
Yeah,
filter?
this is a great question. So basically, in unfortunately, because reverse osmosis in any filtration material doesn't know the difference between a mineral that may be good and bad stuff, the compounds that may be bad, it has no idea what's which. So you have to remove everything. It's the baby in the bathwater mentality. You have to remove everything because even viruses are the smallest particulate matter. And they use, by the way, reverse osmosis in dialysis. My dad and my brother, both renal doctors. And so, they have been requiring federally regulated reverse osmosis water for dialysis since the 1960s when dialysis was invented. So to think that it's that, and that was really more for infection risk for viruses and bacteria. Since that time, God knows we've discovered it's done great with all the chemicals too. But that wasn't the intention originally. And so really you can always infuse minerals back into your diet just by having a great salad or, any number of smoothies or anything because it always can come in through food. You want to make sure your water, though, is perfectly clean as much as it can be so that you don't have those chemicals. And the minerals are very minimal to begin with anyway.
And so do you recommend when you go to a restaurant then to not get the tap water? What's your thought
Great
on
question.
that?
I probably the only human being I know that brings my own water to restaurants.
Really?
And my kids are embarrassed and my husband does care. And, it's one of those things where I have gotten so I've gotten so well versed on the problems with drinking water. I mean, so much deeper than I could even share here. We have 95,000 chemicals. They come into our drinking water through lakes and streams and aquifers. Sewage becomes our drinking water. And 80%, 84% of our US water is supplied by municipal tap. And those are only covering the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974 is the only law in existence that really still manages those 160,000 wastewater treatment plants that serve us. And so there's only 91 chemicals under that law. So when you have 91 chemicals under a law to clean your water, your municipal water, and there's 95,000 that get in potentially, it's a complete disconnect between what we should be drinking and what we get. And so, I have become so, enraged by this that I sort of, I figured I'll fill up at home as often as I can. Certainly, I go on vacation. I don't think about it. I can buy bottled water, but I read the ingredients to see if it's tap water that's just been bottled into bottled water.
Oh, so you want to just tell us about that. So if you're looking at bottled water, what
Yeah.
should we look at? What are your
Well, let's
recommendations?
put it this way. There's a couple problems. There's the quality of the water itself. So 75% of bottled water is actually tap water. People don't realize that. And it's also covered by the FDA, not the EPA. So in other words, there's a lot more loosey-goosey regulation on bottled water than there is even on municipal tap, believe it or not. So that really makes a big difference in water quality. And then you have the plastics. When water sits in plastic, it leaches those harmful chemicals from the plastics, especially in high heat or with damage. Think of it this way: when you put plastics into a dishwasher that are clear, they come out opaque. They come out not see-through because that heat and the scratching actually dislodges those chemicals from the material of the plastic into the food and the drink you eat. Okay. So it's not a strong matrix. Well, same thing goes for bottled water. Bottled water, you could get bottled water in your supermarket, but it might have sat in a warehouse in Texas at 125-degree temperatures for 6 years. Who knows? But the idea is that it transports without refrigeration. And it certainly sits in a lot of weight. In the summertime, I took a picture for the book. I'm sitting in Cape May, New Jersey, 100 degrees, and I'm looking at this truck just completely sitting there with huge bottles of, pallets of water that we're going to drink eventually, if it gets to our supermarket. So I think if you start to think like that, you'd want to, fill up at a source and you'd want to use glass and stainless steel. And then you've really created a water system that seems quite healthy.
But if let's say you're somewhere and that's not an option,
Yeah.
you don't, but I do bring water bottles on vacation and
Yeah.
fill, but let's say you're somewhere that it's not an option. When you said you look at the ingredients, if
So
you're,
they scary, right?
yeah,
So I was in a conference in Nashville, I guess it was, and I went to the refrigerator and, it said municipal tap water. It actually said that on the bottle ingredients. And then they packaged it, charged me $3. I could have just taken a bottle, walked over to the sink, you know? And you can also there's some that say reverse osmosis water, there's some that say distilled. So distilled doesn't always mean that it removes chemicals because distilled really implies that they heat it up to a point where it has no bacteria or viruses. So there is a distinction between distilled water and reverse osmosis because reverse osmosis is actually taking out all of the other stuff that's in there, not just viruses and bacteria. So I just, and look, there are big brands that I'm not going to comment on that have actually moved, believe it or not, from glass to plastic because of economics. Ones that I really like from Europe, and all those springs in Europe and all that. So there's just a variety. It keeps on changing, but essentially, look, I always drink bottled water whenever I'm not around my own filtered water because I think it's better than tap water if you could find that version. But be conscious of reading the ingredients, even in water. I think we take it for granted.
Yeah, because a lot of times people think, "Oh, well, like, I live near New York City. Oh, New York City water is really good." You said,
Oh,
"Yeah,
it
yeah."
makes great bagels. That's what I hear all the time. It's the best bagels was the water. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I like the little Toxins with my bagels."
So a
But
lot of times you'll have an option to get bottled water at the restaurant versus the tap water. So under those circumstances, you would pick
yeah,
the bottled
I
water
would say
then?
bottled water. I mean, that's just my own preference. Again,
Yeah.
your money, most people will drink water that lands on their table. I mean, I think about all the years I sat at a restaurant, people would just plop water on your table and you drink it. You don't know if it's toilet water. You don't know where that water's been. You don't know what it's cut. You don't know their source. In airplanes, which we write about in the book in terms of travel tips, the water tanks in airplanes are horrific. They're very poorly managed. They drop in a chlorine tablet maybe once a month. I'm exaggerating, but I have more details in the book. But there's actual rating systems on drinking water, and so you never really want to drink water on an airplane unless it absolutely comes from a plastic bottle because you don't want the water that's in the tank that they're using for coffee a lot of times at tea when they walk around. You don't know if that's bottled water that they use or it's right out of the tank.
Wow,
So,
lovely.
these are the ones that I think about, as I walk through my toxic sunglasses that I walk through life looking for.
So the interesting thing coming from your background, now you're dealing with people with autoimmune issues, with osteoporosis. So when people, and I know it's hard to just say because you do so many things, you don't just remove the toxins, you also educate people on good food. I guess it all goes together in the healthy
Yeah.
lifestyle, but but it makes a big difference. Is that what you've seen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, nothing is going to solve world peace, right? If you did 5% clean water and 5% decreasing food chemicals and you stop smoking and you got a little more rest and rest is matters because we clear chemicals while we sleep and manage stress, which affects our immune system, our chemistry of our immune system. There's every little piece helps the big puzzle of trying to keep our body much more at a homeostatic kind of space where we're not highs and lows. We really want to go back to anthropology. Where were we when we had clean water, clean food, more time to sleep, less stress, more social interactions, more spirituality, more nature exposure. I mean, that's kind of where I want people to shift in any way they feel that they can do it. And it's different for everybody.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I also teach a happiness program, so I'm so on the same wavelength. And it's amazing, though, when you do incorporate all these pieces, and the toxins is one of them, and it is doable. I always find when people start not with overwhelm, like one thing at a time, and then they just gradually, just like you said, don't buy it. And so if
Right.
it's not in the house, or switch to the frozen organic if you
The
need to.
journey, if you did one change out a month, it would be better than not doing one change a month. I mean, this has been ongoing. I'm still on my journey. I mean, every month I get some other new idea that is really exciting that I incorporate, so it doesn't feel stressful. It's just adding into the repertoire. And you get kind of savvy after a while. You start, I can go to a food store and I can shop in 10 minutes.
Yeah, no,
Just
I'm the same way, and I tell my husband. My
yeah.
husband too, he knows exactly
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
what's
We know
market
what
approved,
self,
what's not
what
approved.
aisle, what perimeter. Exactly. We know some, personal care products. I vetted them on environmental working group. I have a whole chapter on that in the book where you can, I do this with high school students. I bring in bags of, body sprays and tampons and nail polish and I toss them to the kids and we look them up. We check out the level that's been given by environmental working group. We look at alternative sources. They look at other ingredients. I don't tell them what to do. I give them the tools to look them up because those things may change over time. They are going to go off in the world, and I want them to have the tools to look up ththings they put in on and around their bodies for their own health.
So
You
why
know,
don't we
that,
go into that a little bit for everybody listening? Because you do your book. So tell us the tools, because obviously we can only cover so much on the podcast.
yeah.
But I agree with you. Let people know how important this is. And especially coming from you, who has all this background and working with people with so many different issues. And it's
Yeah.
really nice to hear you say, because a lot of people will say, oh yes, but it's a very big part of your program. And so
Yeah.
tell people like where the different tools available.
Yeah, I mean, so patients who comes in with rheumatoid, by the way, which increases your risk for osteoporosis because of the chemistry of rheumatoid arthritis, just in case people want to know, that's another good question is, how do I handle rheumatoid patients for bones versus say a non-rheumatoid? I mean, because there's an accelerated bone loss with rheumatoid or with the medicines that you use with rheumatoid. So you have to think about all those things. But I really like people to know that they can make a big difference in their health and especially their immune system, endocrine system and immune system. These are not separate siloed systems in the human body. They all communicate, even your cancer communication cells. All of this has a lot to do with whether the body's immune system is on alert, is it's heightened, is it's aggravated. And so it's really about how do we quiet down the things that kind of, I hate to be crass, piss off your body. Let's take away the things that piss off your body that make the immune system angry. So getting good sleep has been shown to decrease those inflammatory markers. Eating less chemicals, which kill off the bacteria amongst the pesticides, the bacteria of the gut. The gut is the window into the immune system, into your body, right? Your gut manages all those things. And if it lets things across the tube into the bloodstream, your body might have a reaction. So let's quiet all of the things that affect the gut negatively, which includes stress, by the way. And, let's start thinking about ways to quiet the immune system down and then bolster the body with very simple nutritional support. Because as a culture, modern day humans are not nutritionally sufficient. They're just not. We don't get enough iodine, generally speaking, to protect the thyroid from all the thyroid conditions that are out there. I should say the conditions that are caused by a lot of the chemicals that latch onto the thyroid and can cause endocrine disruption. So, you know, we want to think about all of the things that quiet the immune system. And that goes with bone health because the bones are definitely regulated by the immune system as well and endocrine system. So these endocrine disrupting chemicals are the ones you want to cut out, and there's many of them, but canned foods have BPA, that's an endocrine disruptor. Phthalates, which are a class of chemicals that affect hormones as well. They're in fragrances, a lot of fragrances in personal care and cleaning products. And so I break that down so that you can actually look at your life, not having to know the chemicals, not having to be a toxicologist, but where in your life might you get those exposures and simple swap outs.
Yeah, no, the book is great. You go into everything in detail.
Yeah.
So we have your book, which we'll have in the show notes. We'll have the link to that, and that can be ordered. So the book. So tell us also about your website and the
Yeah.
environmental working group. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate. So in terms of, like you said, a tool for looking things up, environmental working group is probably sprinkled throughout the book several times. That's a very reputable consumer nonprofit group that really vets out products and personal care products by toxicity level, and there's a rating system. So that's something that people can go to ewg.org and kind of look up how to look up their cosmetics and their cleaning products. It's a great resource, but there's other ones in the book as well. But yeah, I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday on Facebook. It's got a really nice following, 51,000 almost, legitimate. And it's really, it talks about what's the problem and what's the solution. What's the problem? What's the solution? And I attach, articles. So it's super on the go, very quick tidbits of what you can learn. You have to invest in why you have to do those changes with the problem, but then here's the solution. I don't post anything that doesn't really have a solution. I don't find that does anything more than freak people out, including myself. So I'm very conscious of how I post. And so the smart human on TikTok, we just launched is really
Oh.
fun. Instagram, of course, Facebook is really for more solid, good stuff. It's much more, I would say dense, but real good information, different age group that reads those posts. And then I have a podcast called the Smart Human Podcast, which I get really interesting researchers, physicians, lawyers that are in the environmental health, chemical wellness spaces so that they can really talk about the research or what you should know when you buy a home in terms of an environmental lawyer. I mean, it's just really a lot to learn.
Wow. Are you seeing that things are improving?
No. I will be very honest that I think, because the manufacturing issues are so terrible and this country is not set up to, I mean, right now, even with Tosca was back in the 1976 era. And now, there's like 5 chemicals a year that are now regulated to be tested. We have 95,000. There's just no way to catch up. So it really what I'm trying to do is give people, instead of being depressed and throw up your hands and say, I'm done, is look, you can do it. It's not that hard. And here's how to do it. And this book lays it out. And the Smart Human podcast tries to give people tidbits. And you don't want to be overwhelmed. You just want to do it at your own pace. And anything you do is better. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, right? Do as much as you can to really see, and I test people's urine and blood for these chemicals. But is it necessary? No, it's really not, because you can take my word for it when you give up certain things that those half-lives and those chemicals are going to wash out. Very chemicals have half-lives. They break down at different rates depending on your body and also the chemistry of the compounds. So what I try to do is give people very reasonable recommendations so that they could kind of get their body free of these chemicals that do harm.
And the book, I have to read something. I wrote this down because I love this, what you said in the book. Yeah, eating certain nutrient-rich pesticides from food can offset the epigenetic effects from our chemical environment, thereby reducing harm to our bodies. And for those who plan to have children, also reduce the risk for harmful epigenetic changes for future generations to come. And I love that. I read that and I said, how inspiring and how good you can feel that when you eat certain food and improve your nutrition, that you're not only making a difference for yourself, but also for future generations, and how important this is.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
genetics, I mean, I try not to lop on the genetic component because I don't wanna ever make people think that they're blamed.
yeah,
If you have a child who has autism or you have a child who's disabled or you yourself had some issue, it's not a blame game, it's a matter of how do we do this better?
yeah.
And it's just understanding how chemicals have the potential to affect genetics. It's called, epigenetics and methylation issues and, that clean, rich, chemical-free foods actually protect us from those genetic changes. And so it's a combination not just of removing chemicals that are harmful, but what are we doing nutrition-wise to bolster our ability to block those chemical problems? And how they play out into successive generations is you want to not mess with your genes. So it's that's kind of the messaging is do it for yourself, but also do it for the successive generations because there are genetic changes that can occur.
Yeah, no, and I just thought that was empowering, that this
Yeah.
does matter, and any positive change we can make in the right direction is not just for ourselves, but it's also for the future. Before we leave, though, there is one thing, since you mentioned it, about testing, because there's so many different ways people say that they test for the chemicals. What are your suggestions? So if people, want to get tested, what are your favorites?
Yeah, if people feel that they need to know those levels, and again, it varies, right? Some chemicals will stay in your blood 6 to 8 hours, some will not. Then you might walk through another room or a door or spend time at another place, and you have a whole different level of exposure from other things. You might have had a week of canned foods and then 3 weeks without. So I don't encourage testing. And the reason I say that is because I think it's the money spent, and they can be very expensive is better spent taking $300 and buying an RO filter than it is nitpicking about which chemicals are in your blood or your urine at any given time. Take my word for it. When you take away these things, you're going to lower those levels. That's what I want people to know. Take my word for it because the studies are there, but put your money into the actual stuff that's going to make you healthier. That's what I prefer. It's very practical more. In terms of testing, there's companies that do, you know, I talk about a couple in the book. I don't promote them. I don't in any way have any financial connection to them. And there's new ones coming out. I'm working with another one. I'm trying to figure out if they're legit, especially with the PFAS chemicals, the perfluoroalkyls that are in a lot of waterways now. They're the non-stick chemicals, Gore-Tex and, stain-free. It's made a lot of news now. So there's testing for these chemicals. The question's going to be, what are you going to do about it? how are you going to change management? It's like in medicine. Why would you test for something you can't really do anything about or interpret properly? So, I say there's Quest and LabCorp can do very basic heavy metal testing that's usually covered by insurance. You can do that in the blood. You can do some other chemicals, but generally most doctors won't test for them unless they actually know what to do with the results.
Got it.
Um,
So just
and
clean it up. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's other outside labs that again are very pricey, but then you wouldn't want them ordered by someone who doesn't technically know how to respond to those results.
Right.
So
So
I
don't read about something and then just say, oh, I have to get this. You really
yeah,
need to work with a practitioner who has the knowledge.
yeah.
And I love the point. What are you going to do with it? To just have the
If you can
information.
say
Yeah.
punchline, right? Eat
Yeah.
clean, remove those. I mean, I talk about the sources of all these chemicals so that you can actually remove them by
Yeah.
the source. That's the goal.
Yeah. So that's so great. So do you also work with people? You were telling we were talking beforehand that people wherever they live, you now work with people virtually.
Yeah, I do telemedicine and I do consulting with anyone. For consulting, it's pretty basic and it's not, writing labs and writing scripts and because I don't see you in person, but you can certainly, learn a lot from a second opinion, a third opinion. And that's what I tend to do for any number of rheumatologic conditions, obviously osteoporosis, osteopenia, and all those kind of things. But also all the exposure issues. I see young children, I see migraines, the integrative medicine training has allowed me to give a lot of good information into all sets of specialties, on the very basic level. Okay. I wouldn't say I'm a neurologist or a cardiologist, but I'm an internist. So I can really speak to a lot of these conditions, but give those alternative or integrative ideas that they may not have been given from their other doctors.
Yeah, no, I love this. And so how would they find you? What's the best way for people to find you? We'll also put this in the show notes, but
Oh, I appreciate that. So I'm in Princeton, New Jersey, physically, and my website is really just at alycohenmd.com. So ALYCOHENMD.com is my practice website. And then, of course, the Smart Human. I believe there may be a link to the practice through the smarthuman.com, but everything on social media is the Smart Human.
okay, because there's so many people who say to me, I want another opinion. They got the diagnosis of osteoporosis and they want to find someone who has a different mindset and can give them all possibilities. So it sounds like that's exactly what you can do. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, my job is not to step on the toes of people's doctors. I pride myself on being very collegiate and figuring this out from an evidence-based Western medicine as well as integrative approach. So I rarely have any issues with other colleagues. And it's all about the patient. To me, if a doctor, has trouble with this, it's really more about it's about the patient getting well and getting what they need. So I'm very open-minded to working with even other rheumatologists and other doctors, and it's very friendly and collegiate. But yeah, I think second opinions, third opinions, I think they're brilliant for any number of issues because right, we should never rely on any one subjective training for such big issues. I say get 10 surgical opinions if you need it.
No, I
Uh,
agree. I agree. This is a very big decision. And,
yeah.
people really are racking their brains out. I don't know what to do because a lot of times they're scared. Look, if you don't go on the medication, you're going to fall and that's the end of
And
you.
don't exercise because you're gonna be fractured. I mean, like that couldn't be more opposite of the
Right. Right.
It scares me when I hear that from people, "You're a porcelain doll, you shouldn't do anything." Well, what do you that makes no sense. You can actually make headway when you do, safe, appropriate exercises that build on bone. So, I just think that sometimes, again, subjective training, every doctor has a different position of how they were trained and what they think is important. No different for myself, but I think when you're told something is so permanent unless they're God, I don't know who they are. I just don't believe that. I've seen many, many cases where patients were given a diagnosis and with such finality that it's just shocking. So I don't think that's ever the case. I think there's miracles everywhere and there's certainly more information everywhere.
Yeah, and that's what I see, that people are, being a physical therapist and working in this field for over 25 years with osteoporosis, seeing people getting so strong, so empowered, so healthy, so happy, and their stress is reduced. It's just such a win-win. So I just can't thank you for being such a big part of it and all the research you did. The book, I really love the book. The book is such a fabulous resource, and it really, hits home why you need to do this, why it's not just something, oh, maybe I'll deal with. And you give doable steps. So is there any last minute things you want to share? You've been so generous with your time and giving us such great information.
I just think that what you do as well, it takes a village, as we were talking about earlier, that there's a really, it's empowering to have colleagues that work together in all fields, PT, nutrition, health coaching, physicians, nurses, doulas, whatever. We are a very, I guess, unfortunately, a minority compared to the Western institution of medicine. And I think the more good, smart information that's out there is really helpful. So it's always wonderful to be on a program like yours and, to share information because it really does take a village.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the work you do. And you don't live that far from me. So we really don't live far apart. I live in
Okay.
Morristown, New Jersey. So not too far. So we'll have to get together in person
Pretty
one day.
much. Like fun.
Well, thanks so much for being
Thanks for
here.
having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Cohen as much as I did, and have a better understanding of why it's so important to start reducing the toxins in our life, as well as feeling good that there's so much that can be done in terms of your bone health. All the links that Dr. Cohen talked about will be in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.